Well, here to discuss that, the questions about the potential and the challenges in forming those new ties is the EU Africa policy analyst Madu. Welcome, Uzo.
Thank you.
What does it mean right now? How much trade, for example, does the UK do at the moment with Africa?
Well, the real issue is that actually the UK has a deficit of trade with Africa, so it means that Africa is in a good position. So I think the opportunities there are to expand international trade ties and also to possibly replace some of the trade relations that the UK has with its EU now 27 partners.
Are there any countries in Africa that you can think of that that the UK doesn't trade with, that they could open up trade lines with?
I think that the UK has a very good coverage on the African continent. And I think really the key is, one, to strengthen the ties and also to look at in what model this will be in. So, for instance, they're talking a lot about the Commonwealth model. There's 18 African countries that are part of the Commonwealth model. And it's really about those African countries gearing up, lobbying and pushing for change and pushing for better trading terms vis-à-vis the European Union.
Does being in the EU make it problematic for the UK in dealing with Africa? Do you see all those problems, whatever they may be, melting away?
I think it does make it difficult simply because they have to work as a bloc. So the UK has to work within the EU parameters in order for it to deal with African countries. And there's also a cultural difference. The UK is a lot more pragmatic, if I would say so myself, and a lot less protectionist than maybe some of the other EU countries. For instance, in the common agricultural policies, in terms of giving EU farmers subsidies, and this not being very beneficial for African farmers.
Okay, so when it comes down to things like export-import rules and regulations, I mean, everybody says that being in the EU, we've got all these rules and regulations, we ought to streamline them. I mean, are they causing a problem? Can they be simplified?
They can be simplified. They have extremely high safety standards, and to a certain extent that's a good thing. But the practicality of it is that if the UK, or when the UK does leave, it is still going to need to trade with the EU. So in terms of a UK perspective, the high standards are likely to carry on.
Now, we know, Uzo, that the reason you are in London at the moment, you went to the LSE Africa Summit. Now, what were the main topics of interest that came out of that for you?
Well, it was largely around building for Africa, so looking at how African solutions can be provided for African issues. So really rethinking African trade policy, looking at philanthropy and how that can become part of economic development for the continent, and also a large focus on the diaspora and their role, what they can do in order to contribute to Africa's development.
There has been a criticism, I suppose you would say, of African countries that they're more open to the world than they are to themselves.
Yes.
Now, explain first of all, what does that mean?
Well, that means that we have, in Africa, they have many, many trade agreements with the EU, with China, with the US and everybody else. However, moving goods and moving services and moving people is extremely difficult. The red tape and the burden on cross-border relations is very, very difficult. And so there is work being done on the ground, the Continental Free Trade Agreement, which will possibly be the biggest free trade area in the world, which is soon to be agreed and negotiated by the end of this year.
Let me put you on the spot. How do you see the future?
I see the future as very bright. I have to admit that before the Brexit referendum, I was a bit dubious. But now we're in this situation, we can be a bit more open. And I think the important thing is that African countries and African organisations really lobby their right for better trade deals.
Madu, thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you.